Hello everybody, welcome to our live event. My name is Brenda K.B. and I design knit projects and crochet projects and sometimes sewing projects. And today I'm going to be working on this adorable little knitted pumpkin garland. You can see it hanging up here behind me, all these little pumpkins. And then I also have some here on the table that you guys can see. There's 4 different sizes, but it's really all the same instructions, and so it's very, very simple to just memorize how to make these little pumpkins, and I'll be talking you through it all the way from the beginning to the end, and any of the changes for the different sizes. We're just going to be talking about those as well. This is a great project for those of you who are newer to knitting, especially if you've never used double point needles before, you're a little nervous to try using double point needles. I'm going to be using them here in this live event, and I'll be talking you through the whole process. So these pumpkins are really pretty fast to make. They take an experienced knitter probably somewhere around an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then a little bit longer for somebody who is newer at it. You know, I would allow like a couple hours or 2.5 hours or something per pumpkin. So this garland is made so that you can, or the instructions are written up so that you can adjust it to whatever length that you need, however many pumpkins you want to make. I mean, really, it's just as simple as threading all the pumpkins onto the cord and spacing them how you'd like them to be for whatever distance you're making it for. So maybe you're going to make it for over a doorway or a mantelpiece, or along some a piece of furniture or a railing or something like that. That way you can just figure out how many pumpkins you need, or just start making pumpkins and then decide that's enough pumpkins, I'm gonna string them up onto wherever you want to put them. So we'll be talking through that all the way so that you guys know what to do. At the end, we'll talk about the finishing after we make these little pumpkins and how to string them up and make sure they don't slide all over the place. All right, I'm glad that you guys are here. Of course, this is a live event. If you want to say hi, you can drop that in the comments. Tell me where you're knitting from. Tell me projects you're interested in making, or if you have any questions, if there's something that I'm doing that isn't very clear, you need a little bit more information about something, go ahead and drop that in the chat as well, and I'll try to answer that during this hour's event. So, all right. So let's start by just talking about the materials you're going to need. So first of all, there is a download which has instructions, and there's some pictures in there for you as well. But it's got the complete directions, and it has specifics like exactly what kind of yarns I used and stuff for my little scrappy pumpkins. Which, I forgot to mention, this is a great project for using up scraps. So don't feel like you have to go buy a bunch of yarn at the store. You can just raid your stash and find things that'll work for pumpkins. Obviously if you don't have anything that is in the color palette that you want, then of course you can go to the store and go shopping, but I'm just letting you know, like, I just looked through my stuff and found some colors that I thought looked nice together and looked like autumn to me, and I'm using those. All right, so you can go ahead and download this. This is a free download for everybody. The link is in the description. And that will walk you through the whole thing. So, in case you are just watching this now, not working your way through, you'll have all the information when you're done. Of course, you can always go back and watch this live event as well if you need a little refresher on some of the techniques that we're going to be doing. And then also you're going to be needing, of course, some yarn. I am using a worsted weight yarn. And so I chose, because I was just using scraps, I have like a merino wool, I have 100% acrylic, and then I have like a mix of different fibers here in this little white pumpkin. But all of them are a similar weight. They're all worsted weight, which is a number 4. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about when I say a worsted weight or number 4, it's like the most prevalent yarn that you would find like in a big box store that people oftentimes use for making afghans or sweaters. I can just show you like what a strand of it looks like this. It's basically a medium weight yarn. But you can use whatever yarn you want to. That's going to affect the size of your pumpkin though. So, if you're going to use a chunky weight yarn, you're going to get a larger pumpkin. So just think about how that would look on a garland, or maybe you don't want to make it for a garland. Maybe you just want it for a centerpiece or something like that. So that wouldn't even matter. But just think about that and how the proportions are going to work with whatever you're going to be using these pumpkins for. If you have like some sack weight yarn leftovers or other, fingering weight yarns, you can use those. You could double them up to make them a little thicker, or you can make teeny tiny little pumpkins, which would be incredibly adorable. So, just something to think about. If you already have some scraps and colors you like, it's just not the right yarn weight, you can just sort of adjust your needles accordingly to get a nice firm fabric, and then go ahead and use whatever you have. All right, so we need some yarn, and you need about 35 yards for the largest pumpkin. You'll need less for the smaller pumpkins. This is of the main color, and you only need about 2 yards for the contrasting color, which is this little stem bit here. And then you're going to be needing, of course, knitting needles, and I'm using these double point needles throughout. So these are a size 6, which is a 4mm needle. But you know, you can use whatever needle you need to in order to knit up a nice firm gauge, because it doesn't really, you know, you don't have to get exactly the same gauge. Your pumpkins don't need to be exactly the same size as mine. You know, it's not like somebody's wearing this. It's not a project that where the gauge really matters. But what does matter is that when you knit up your fabric, that it is a nice firm fabric and that you don't see a lot of holes between your stitches. Even when you stretch it, you don't want to see that stuffing showing between all of your stitches. So that's really more important than getting the exact gauge. Okay, oh, and then of course you're going to need the stuffing. So I just am using this fiberfill stuffing, and this stuffing, this is a little bit stickier than what I usually use. This is, I think it's called dry, something that with the word dry in it. It's like fiberfill dry something. And I was like, what does that mean? And I got it. And it is very sticky. It really molds incredibly well into the pumpkin. But the one drawback is that this stuffing, it's very textured and it kind of grips onto itself a lot. So I found when I was doing the finishing steps where you make these sort of long stitches to create that pumpkin shape, and we're sliding a needle through the pumpkin, through the stuffing, my needle was kind of getting stuck in there a little. You can definitely push it through, but I did notice that it was not, this fiberfill is not as slippery as the kind that I normally use. So this just, you know, you'll see me switching to a different needle that's a little bit sharper when we do that last step. Instead of normally when I'm, you know, weaving in ends or sewing through something that I've knit or crochet, usually I use a blunt end tapestry needle, which is what you see here. But for doing those stitches, I'm going to use a slightly sharper tapestry needle. I mean, it would work with this. You could do it. It's just a little bit annoying. So we'll talk a little more about that when we get to that point. You don't have to be so careful about what stuffing you're buying. I'm just letting you know because this was something that was surprising to me. Okay. And you just need like little bits of that stuffing, you know, to fill out your pumpkin. And that's going to depend, you know, how much you need is going to depend on how many pumpkins you're making on your garland. So, you know, just keep that in mind. And the last thing that you'll be needing is some jute twine. So this is a 3mm twine that I bought. It's just, you can find it like in the gardening section of places or at craft stores. I bought this at Amazon, and I think I linked to it. Did I link to this? Yeah, I did. I linked to it in the list of materials in your download, just because that way you could, you know, see what it looks like up close and see what this actually is. So you can check it out there. All right. Let's see. Oh, we've got a bunch of good mornings coming in. Good morning from Kearney, Missouri. I've been there. We've got a hi from Cambridge, England. Awesome. And Sandy is saying lovely afternoon from Austria. These pumpkins are super adorable. Thank you. And Judy Sanders says, so happy this notice popped up. I love knitting and I wanted to knit pumpkins. I'm from Folsom in Northern California. Cool. Well, welcome, all of you guys. Thanks for saying hi. I appreciate that. All right, so let's get started creating our little pumpkins. So to begin, part of the reason that I'm saying that this is a good a good project for those of you who are newer with the double point needles, and especially if you're knitting something that is like a little amigurumi or a little toy. A lot of times we start out with just a few stitches on our knitting needles, and we have all these knitting needles kind of going at the same time, and it's very awkward for the first few rounds, really. But because we're going to be starting our pumpkin at the stem end, and we're going to be doing a little bit of I-cord here, and if you don't know how to do I-cord, that's okay. It's very simple, and I'll be walking you through it. We're going to do a little bit of I-cord here, and that gives you a little bit to kind of hang on to as you're knitting. And then once we start working and that's only with 2 knitting needles. You have your I-cord on 2 knitting needles, and we'll get into that in a minute. So it's not so much to manage. And then by the time you're adding more knitting needles to your project, then you have a little something to hang on to. It makes it a little bit easier. So we're sort of easing you into the double point needles. Also, as a side note, if you just really do not like double point needles, you're somebody who is already, maybe you're already familiar with using 2 circular needles instead of double point needles, you can completely do that instead, of course, if you'd like to do that. All right, so we are going to cast on 4 stitches. So you'll just make a slip knot however you like to make slip knots. I'm going to place that on my needle. And then you can cast on however you like. I always do the German twisted cast on because this is like my go-to cast on. I like how the edge looks. So actually, here, let me show you how to do that in case you've never done that before, just in case you're curious. But we do have, I'm sure that there is a video on this on the Knitting Circle website if you'd like to check that out, if you need a little bit more information on that. So we've got our slip knot on our hook, and then we're going to hold this in the slingshot position. So we've got the strand connected to the ball here, and then the ending strand right here. We're going to go underneath here, like basically that makes a loop, and then we're going to go down through and then over across the top of that loop and pull that little bit through here. I'll do that a couple more times here. Underneath, grab that strand, bring it across the top, and pull that through that little triangle right there. And like I said, you can use any cast on you'd like to here. You don't need to use this cast on. I was just slowing it down in case you wanted to see what I was doing there. Okay, so we've got 4 stitches on our needle, and we're going to start working in I-cord. So when you do that, here is the strand that's connected to the ball right here. We are going to just slide this over to the opposite point like that, and we're going to bring the strand that's connected to the ball across the back, and we're going to knit with that. So in this very first stitch. So I like to hang on to this beginning strand because I feel like it makes things slip around a little less, and it's a little less awkward. So I kind of hold that in my fingers like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and knit each stitch across. So there's my first stitch, and when you knit the beginning stitch, you can, as you're pulling it off the needle, you can kind of pull on that strand right here just to make sure that it's nice and tight. I mean, it doesn't have to be super tight, but you don't want to ladder across the back. And I'll explain that a little bit more here as we go. So we're going to go ahead and knit the next 3 stitches. So 1, 2, and here's the last one. There's our third one. And then we've ended with our yarn tail on this side once again. We're going to slide this over to the other tip. I'm going to grab that with my finger. This is the yarn tail that's connected to the ball, and that's just going to be brought straight across the back, and we're going to do another row of knitting here. So as we make that first stitch and pull it off our needle, I just kind of cinch up on a little bit and then go ahead and knit the remaining three stitches here. All right, that was our second row in I-cord. Really, it's a round. We're working in the round even though it doesn't look like it. We're going to slide it across, and here's the third round of I-cord. So we're going to knit across 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll do one more round. We're going to slide that to the other end and just bring that across the back and knit 4. All right, so there's our little stem. How cute. Oh, we've got lots more hellos. We've got a hello from Charlotte, North Carolina. Oh, dry polyester packing. Just bought some at Michael's. That's what it's called. Thank you, Judy. I wasn't completely sure of that. Yes, dry polyester packing. Let's see. And Madison says hello from a rare, rainy South California. Okay. I hope it's a lovely rain. And Jennifer says, good morning from Michigan. Hi, Jennifer. And we have a Lillian from Columbia, but I live in Lakeland. Oh, you're from Columbia, but you live in Lakeland, Florida. Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so we've got our 4 rounds of I-cord, and now we're going to start increasing as we add more needles. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring this yarn right over to the beginning again, and on our first knitting needle, we're going to knit 2 stitches. We're actually just going to be knitting this first stitch, but we're going to knit it through the front and through the back, and that's how we do an increase. So we're going to slide our needle through there, and we're knitting just like we normally do, and then we're going to knit back here. Okay, so actually I'll go ahead and pull that off my needle, and then I'll show you that again. So this is called, it's abbreviated KFB, knit front back. Okay, so and then we're going to pull that off our needle. And if you're newer to double point needles, try to do this first round fairly tightly so that your knitting needle doesn't want to just drop out. See, I can actually pick this up and it's not going to fall out. This also is helpful if you, my knitting needles, they're plastic, but they have sort of a matte texture to them. They're not slippery plastic. And I have noticed with bamboo needles, those are great for beginners who haven't worked in the round on double point needles before. I recommend those, or sort of a matte plastic like this. If you're using metal double point needles, you can certainly use them, but they do tend to be a little bit more slippery. And so I find they just kind of want to slide out of your stitches if you're not making them quite tight enough. So it does get easier the more stitches you get on your needles, then they're not just going to slide out. But when you just have a couple on and you're just letting it hang there, sometimes they just fall out. Okay, so there's our first knitting needle. We're going to bring in our second knitting needle, and we're going to do the same thing in the next stitch. So we're going to knit in the front. So that's how we normally do right there. So we're knitting there, and then we're going to knit before we pull that off our knitting needle. We're going to place our needle through that same stitch, and we're going to knit through the back. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so now we've got two knitting needles used, and we're just going to drop that, and we're going to add our next knitting needle here. And we have 2 stitches left from our I-cord, so we're going to do knit front back here and knit front back here, and they're both going to end on this needle. Okay, so we're going to knit the front and then knit the back. And knit the front and knit the back. Just like that. Okay, so now we have a total of 8 stitches. We had 4, and then we did knit front back in each of them. So we have two stitches where there were 1 before, so we've got 8. And if you take a look at your knitting needles, just make sure that they're in the right, that nothing is twisted around. You're going to want to just look at, here I'm going to bring this ending tail right between those 2 needles. Here is our next needle here, and you can tell what order things want to be in if you just kind of pull up on your fabric and make sure that you've got that little line that goes across right here. That's from knitting in the back. So this was knitting in the front, knitting in the back. That one should come second on your needle. Okay, so knitting in the front, knitting in the back. Same thing here, knitting in the front, knitting in the back. That's how you know your needles aren't like twisted around like this or something like that. I mean, you can also just sort of try to twist or untwist them if they feel like they're twisted. But just take a little look at those and make sure that they are in the order that they're supposed to be in. And then at this point, you can cut this ending yarn tail. So I'm just gonna snip that there. We don't need it anymore. Don't cut it too short though, because you don't want that loop to elongate and for it to pull out. Just give it, at least 4 inches or 6 inches, because you're gonna have to weave that in later. All right, so now we're going to join our next color. So I'm going to be using this sort of orangey gold here. And to add that next color, we're going to just let that color just sort of drop to the front. I know that seems weird. Why would you want your yarn tail on the front? But to me, it just is easier to hang on to if it's going from the front, and then this strand right here is connected to the ball. Okay, right there. So I'm going to go ahead and reposition my needles so that this needle, the one that I'm about to work across, is on top of the next needle. Now this could be a personal preference thing. You don't have to do it exactly as I do, but I wanted to show you this because I find it's so much easier to hold on to if my hand is underneath, like as I'm knitting with my right hand here, if my hand is here and this needle is above it, that really does help. Okay, so this is coming from the front, and I'm just gonna go ahead and do a knit front back in each stitch around with this new color. So I'm hanging on to the new color here, and I'm going to insert my needle and knit through the front, and before I pull it off my needle, I'm going to knit through the back, like that. And then I can pull that off onto my needle. And I'm going to do the same thing here, knit through the front, knit through the back. Just like that. And I've got this needle is now free, so I'm going to use that needle for knitting the stitches on the following needle. So we're going to knit through the front and then knit through the back. Pull it off our needle, knit through the front and knit through the back and pull that off. And now here is our third needle of the round. The reason that I distributed my stitches as I did was so that it would be really obvious when we were on the last knitting needle of the round, because that's the one that has double the amount of stitches of either of the other two needles. Right now it doesn't because we haven't worked this, but it will when we're done with this, with this round here. So we're going to knit through the front, knit through the back. Drop it off the needle, knit through the front, knit through the back. Drop it off, knit through the front, knit through the back. Knit through the front and knit through the back. And now that last stitch, because we cut it and it's just sort of hanging there, that one tends to get a little stretched out that we worked into, that stitch right there from the previous round, but you can just tighten that up by pulling on that ending yarn tail, just so that loop doesn't get too stretched out. You can always tug on it later as well when you get to weaving in your yarn tails, your yarn ends. Okay, and I like to leave my yarn tails on the outside for weaving in later. So I'm just bringing that beginning yarn tail to the outside here. All right, let's see. Oh, okay, so we've got a question, or a comment, affordable project, yes, especially because you can use scraps. And what is I-cord? So I hope that I answered what that was when I began working it. I'm sorry, I must be getting this question a little bit late. I apologize for that. The I-cord was just as we were working the very beginning, we knit across and then we slide that whole bit to the right again and then knit across. Instead of knitting on circulating needles around and around, it just gets easier to slide it over and then bring that, our working yarn to that first stitch and then just begin knitting it across. But that's just basically the name of the process of when we worked this stem here. And of course, after this is over, you can go back and watch any part of this. You can watch the whole video again. So if you need a review of the I-cord, you can go ahead after this is over and check that part out again. All right, and we've got some hellos from West Tennessee and Canada and Phoenix, Arizona. Hi, you guys. Thanks for saying hello. All right, so now we're going to start, we're going to do just one round even, okay? So we're just going to be knitting in each stitch. So, and like I said before, as I like to adjust my double point needles so that they go underneath on the right side and then on top of the next needle on the left side. That just seems to help when it's at that type of an angle. Then my hand can fit here. If I put it the other way, like this, and I'm trying to knit here, it's really hard for me to knit here with this needle in the way. And then as I'm pulling on this needle, the needle that I'm knitting from, it's pushing on this needle, pushing it up. So I find that to be very annoying. So I always just sort of arrange them like this, with this needle underneath that needle, and then the end of the needle on top of the following needle, if that helps. But there's not a wrong way to do it. I mean, you don't have to do it this way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You will find whatever way it seems comfortable and less awkward for you. I just am pointing this out because when I first learned how to use double point needles, I didn't think about things like that. And I just remember thinking it was really awkward. And then once I figured this out, that I always just need to angle my needle a certain way, and then there's room for my hand, then that just seemed to make everything easier for me. Okay, so here we are. We're just going to be knitting each stitch across. And again, I'm going to be holding onto this beginning yarn tail with my fingers as I knit this first stitch. And that's because I'm a continental knitter, that makes it easier for me because I can just hang on to that. But if you knit with the yarn in your right hand, if you do English style, then you won't really be able to do that. But you can go ahead and wrap your yarn like that and pull it through. Sorry, you guys, I have actually been practicing to be a better English style knitter because I know that there are so many of you guys out there who knit the English style way, or the thrower way, or however you like to say that. And I'd like to be able to be fluent in both ways so that I can show you guys, and I'm getting better at it, but I've been knitting continental style basically since I started knitting, and it is a struggle for me to stop and remember how to knit the other way. But I am practicing. Okay, so I have just 8 more stitches left here on this last needle. All right, so now we are going to do one more round with increases. So it's exactly the same style of increases as we were doing before. We're going to do a knit through the front, and then before we drop it off, we're going to knit the back of that same stitch and then drop it off our needle. So knit through the front, knit through the back, knit through the front, knit through the back, knit through the front, knit through the back. And then we'll do that again here. Knit through the front, knit through the back. We're going to do that all the way around. And then we should have a total of 32 stitches. Let me double check that. Let's see. Yeah, that should be right. Knit through the front, knit through the back. And then that's all the increasing and all the shaping that we need to do. Well, I shouldn't say all the shaping. We are going to do some decreasing towards the end. But it's actually pretty simple. You're basically doing 3 rounds of increasing in this pumpkin, and then later on we're going to do 2 rounds of decreasing at the very end. But other than that, it's just knitting around. All right, so we've got all of our stitches on, and we're ready to just kind of work in the round at this point. So you can go ahead and just knit and knit and knit and knit many rounds until, let's see, let me just check with my pattern here and I'll tell you how many rounds we're knitting. Oh, and I should mention too that for this pattern, even though it looks like this one might be a bigger circumference than this one, it's really just because it's the longer pumpkin. I know that probably doesn't make sense until you start stuffing it and seeing what happens. They are exactly the same pattern, the same number of stitches. Everything's exactly the same for all 4 of these slightly different sized pumpkins. They are all exactly the same except for the rounds that we're working even, which we've started now. We're just going to work around and around and around. And this goldish one, I worked 33 rounds. For the rusty orange one, this one was only 27 rounds. For the sort of white tweed one, this one was 23 rounds. And for the little sort of bluish one, I did 21 rounds. So, and this is all written in your pattern, but you also don't need to follow exactly how many rounds I did. Like somewhere in the ballpark of of those amount of rounds, you can just kind of make it up and have pumpkins of different sizes. You know, this was sort of a way for me to say, hey, here's the difference between the 23 rounds and the 30, what was this? Let's see, 21 rounds and 33 rounds, sorry. That's how different they're going to look. And so you can really knit as many rounds as you like to for whatever shape pumpkin you feel like making or how much yarn you have. You know, if this is a scrappy project, you might be feeling like you're running out of yarn. So don't worry about it as long as you get enough to make, you know, the smallest pumpkin out of it. You know, you can go a little further if you'd like, or, you know, just make the smallest size, doesn't matter. Okay, so you're just gonna keep knitting around and around, and you just, every time you make a round, you just knit your way across, and then you use the double point needle that you've just freed to knit the next section. Okay, so we're just knitting it across here, knitting each stitch. And now we've freed this needle and we can use that to knit across this row here, or this section, I should say. So, and you'll know that you're at the end of the round because the very last needle is the one with all the many stitches on it. It's gonna have twice as many stitches as either of the other two needles. So that's an easy way for you to like kind of realize, oh yeah, I need to pay attention. What am I doing on the next round? Oh, I'm still knitting, okay. And so you'll just keep on knitting until you have the proper amount of rows. And I'm gonna show you how you can count those up in just a second here, in case you sort of lose track, which seems inevitable when you do that many rounds, right? Even if you have a round keeper or a way to count your rounds. So that's what it looks like. You'll just keep knitting and knitting and knitting. And for my pumpkin, this is the longest pumpkin. So this is the one that is 33 rounds. And this is about what it would look like. Okay, it looks very long, but once we start doing the little stitches in it, it's gonna shrink up just a little bit. By the stitches, I mean we're gonna be doing these long stitches to create these little sections in the pumpkin. So if you're not quite sure how many rounds you've done, if you take a look at the stitch that is the very first stitch of the round, so that would be the one right after you've worked across all of these stitches, you know, the needle with the most stitches, you can follow that one down all the way down to where it turns green, okay? And if you want to count, the very first stitch of the pumpkin color, you know, after we changed color to this orangey color, that's going to count as round number 5. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, and 33. All right, so we've got 33 rounds in this pumpkin color here. And that's where I'm gonna stop doing my, you know, just working even section. And now I'm going to start doing some decreasing. So, we've got a question about being left-handed. You're a very great teacher, but I'm very left-handed. Do you think there'll be a day that you can post something live, how to knit crochet for left-handed people? Okay, I don't know about, I think I have to do a little more research in that and practicing in that for me to be able to show you knitting with left-handed, because I think most left-handed people that I know that knit are either knitting continental like me, or maybe they're knitting the English style too, but I think because it's kind of a two-handed thing, usually there isn't, you know, most people don't knit the opposite direction who are left-handed, I think, although I could be wrong about that. But as far as left-handed crochet goes, that is a whole different thing, because when you're crocheting, all of your stitches are, well, you hold a hook, it's just one hook, of course, and you're holding that in your dominant hand, right? So if you're a right-handed crocheter, you would crochet from right to left. If you're a left-handed crocheter crocheting with the hook in your left hand, you'd crochet from left to right. So everything gets very confusing, especially for, you know, left-handed crocheters. So what I always tell our left-handed crocheters is, if you flip the video, if you can go into your screen settings or watch it in a mirror or somehow flip the video horizontally, and there's actually an easy way to do this. If you watch on YouTube, you can actually, there's an easy way to flip your screen Maybe I can come back and post that, but or you can probably even just Google it, how to flip your screen in YouTube. But you can flip your screen horizontally, and then it'll look like I am crocheting left-handed, and all the stitches will look like how you would be making them with the hook in your left hand. So that helps a lot for left-handed crocheters, because you can basically make any crocheter you're watching a video of look like they're crocheting left-handed style. Yeah, this is a whole big topic, I guess. So I think I need to do a little more research about the knitting thing. So maybe we'll just put a pin in that and come back to that later. Let's see. Oh, we've got, Judy says, I'm going to try continental because it seems like it's easier to make the stitches tighter. I find it that way, but that's just probably just because I'm a continental knitter. Maybe other people who are fluent in English knitting and continental, if you guys want to weigh in here and let us know if you feel like it's easier to make your stitches tighter if you're knitting continental style, then let us know, because I'm curious about that too. Okay. All right, so now we're going to start doing our decreases. So we're going to just be knitting 2 together all the way around. So in order to do that, we're going to basically treat these 2 stitches as though they're 1 stitch. So we're going to insert our needle from left to right through these stitches, and then we're going to wrap the needle and pull it through, just like we're doing a regular knit stitch. So we're just basically treating 2 loops as 1 and doing a regular knit. So we're going to go through both those stitches and bring it through. Both those stitches, bring it through. 2 stitches, bring it through. Let's see, I think I got an extra loop there somehow. What did I do? Okay. I think I didn't quite get underneath that first loop, or the most left loop there, but we're good now. So that should be 4 stitches on the first 2, each of the first 2 needles. So we'll do that again. So we're just knitting these 2 together. Sorry that this is so similar to my yarn color. I'm gonna switch that out. I was running out of the white needles here, so I threw in an extra bamboo one, but that's not very helpful on this color of yarn here. We'll just kind of get rid of that one. And I'll pull one of these out. There we go. And here is my last side, the one with all of the mini stitches, and we're going to just be knitting 2 together all the way across. All right, there is our last 2 stitches of the round, knitting those together. And now we're going to do 1 round of just working even, so just making 1 knit stitch in each stitch around here. And always, whenever you're switching to the next needle, so you've knit across this needle and you're about to knit your next stitch, it's always good to make that stitch nice and tight. So I'm really pulling on this here as I'm dropping that off, because that will lessen the, we call that a laddering kind of effect, or a ladder when between, it'll probably ladder somewhat. Let's see, well, not too much. I was pretty good about pulling that tight, but you can see, like, between any 2 rows of stitching, if you don't make that first stitch kind of tight on your, like on the first stitch of the next needle, then sometimes you can sort of see these little horizontal bars, you know, that run along your stitches. You can see those, and there's a little space between, and you can see where people have switched from one needle to the next. So you know, right here, I'm switching to the next needle. I'm going to make a special effort to pull this a little tighter here to keep that from happening on that very first stitch. All right, so now at this point, we're going to stuff our pumpkin. And we're just going to push. I'm just leaving my needles in there. Just make sure they're nice and centered so nothing falls off. You want to drop any stitches here. And when you push this down in there, when you're, excuse me, when you're stuffing something, it's good to kind of wiggle your fingers and get that fiber fill to really get down in there. You know, just put a little in at a time. Don't just put like the whole wad in and try to get it to push down in toward the stem, because it might not work. So what I'm doing this on the inside of the pumpkin to kind of try and mix that fiber fill together and really fill out the top of my pumpkin there, okay? So you can see what that looks like. And we're gonna add a little bit more in there. And try and mix this fiber fill in with the fiber fill you've already added. So it doesn't look like two separate blobs that are kind of just sitting next to each other. You kind of mix those in with your fingers as you're putting it in. And if you're having a lot of trouble with this, you know, you could certainly break off. I've seen people, you know, break off tiny amounts and put it in, and that does keep that from happening. It seems like it takes forever though, so I don't usually use that method, but you do need to kind of reach in there and get those two clumps of fiber fill to kind of intermix a little bit there. I don't think I needed all of that. There we go. So it should be fairly firmly stuffed. You don't want to see, you know, you don't want to stuff it so much that it's distorted and it's really going to be difficult to put these little stitches in. So, but it should feel fairly firmly stuffed. Otherwise, you might not be able to keep the stuffing all up inside the top of the pumpkin, and it might just not be as nice of a shape later. All right, so now we're gonna do another round of decreasing. So it's a little bit awkward because you've got the stuffing in there, but you can still do it. So just kind of push that out of the way. And we're going to be knitting two together again. Oh, here you can see a little bit of that laddering I was talking about, because I wasn't pulling those stitches quite tight enough there, but that's okay. It's not so bad that you know, I need to undo anything or anything like that. All right. So this part, just give yourself a little extra time because you've got this, you know, a stuffed thing hanging off your needles. So it is a little bit awkward. If this is just really frustrating to you to do this last round of decreases, what you can do is you can just run your yarn through all of the remaining stitches and don't worry about that last round of decreases. It'll still turn out cute. You know, you don't have to do this. I feel like this makes it a little bit easier to get the very center bottom of the pumpkin to look really neat and tidy, and you don't have a gap when you kind of cinch in all of those stitches. So I really like to do this last round of the decreasing of the knit two togethers. I think that it helps, but you know, it is, you know, if you're newer to knitting and you're just having a hard time with these double, you know, you've got the newer to knitting plus the double point needles, plus you got the stuffing in there, it could be a little frustrating, and you don't need to make yourself, you know, don't make yourself crazy over it. Just kind of run your needle through those last stitches, and I'll show you how to do that now. So whether you have 8 stitches, which is what you should end up with if you follow the pattern, or even if you have 16 stitches, you can still do the next step in the same way. So we're going to make sure we have, I would say, at least a yard, just to be on the safe side, of yarn there. And here, I'm going to put it on my blunt needle just so you guys can see what's happening. And then you can go ahead and thread your yarn onto a tapestry needle. And then we're going to run that tapestry needle through each of the remaining loops. So, and as you do that, you can pull your your knitting needles free. So we're gonna just pull those through, pull these two through. And go through these 4. Like that. And then we can go ahead and just pull on that and tighten it up until there's no hole. And I always, no matter whether I'm doing a hat or a toy or whatever, I like to run through this a second time if I can, if it isn't too awkward or the yarn isn't too snaggy. I will just run my yarn through the exact same path one more time. And if you miss a loop here or there, no big deal. I just like to do that because I feel like it's a little bit stronger. You're not just relying on one strand to keep all of those loops held together there. Okay, so now we're gonna do a little bit of shaping with basically like a couple of long stitches. So if you're not a sewer, that's okay. I'm going to be showing you how to do this. It's really not tricky, I don't think. But if you guys have any questions about this, definitely let me know. Okay, so we're going to be taking our needle and we're going to go from, this is where our yarn is coming from, the bottom of our pumpkin, and we're just going to go in, if we just sort of pick one of these ridges here from one column of stitches and just follow it up. And you're just going to push your needle from top down through the bottom. And so this step is much simpler to do on one of the shorter pumpkins like this because your needle will just pop through. I wanted to demonstrate it on the tallest pumpkin because it's the most awkward, just so that you have all the information that you need. But just keep that in mind. Like if you're newer at this and you feel like this is going to be tricky, you can absolutely just make like shorter pumpkins and not worry about trying to push your needle through. But I think you'll find that's easier than you think. All right, so even if you have a pretty short needle like this and your pumpkin's really tall, you can just take your needle and push it down through the center of your pumpkin and it's going to come out down here. And what we're aiming for is making a big stitch right here that's going to connect this end to where my needle is. And then, so that's like right here, okay? And then we want our needle to come out somewhere close to the opposite side. So I like to think of this as being kind of like the beginning of a peace sign. Okay, I'm going to turn it this way. So just imagine there's going to be a stitch here. I'm just going to simulate the stitch where the stitches are with these needles. We'll see if I can do this. So let's say there's a stitch there, and then I want there to be 2 other long stitches kind of towards the bottom of the pumpkin, like this. I guess it isn't exactly a peace sign. There would be another little line right here. This is kind of more like the Mercedes sign. But think you want this to be a little bit wider than this section. So this is the first stitch we're making, and then we're going to make these 2 just a little closer together, but exactly opposite of this, okay? If you can kind of see this formation here. And if it helps, you can put like a little stitch markers there to give you something to aim for, or do a little wash away marker on there or something like that. Also, keep in mind that these are organic shapes, and if your pumpkin doesn't have perfectly dispersed little lobes around your pumpkin, nobody's going to notice or care. It's going to be cute. My pumpkins are not perfectly, like this lobe is a little wider than that one. It's fine. It's like an organic, cute shape. It really doesn't matter. I'm just trying to give you ideas on what we're aiming for here. Okay, so we're going to be running this through from top to bottom. And see, because I'm using this dry packing stuff, my needle sometimes gets a little stuck in there and I have to kind of wiggle it to get it to come through. So on the next stitch, I'm gonna switch to that sharper needle. Okay, and so to make your needle come out when this is so long, you just have to push it. See how I'm just squishing this pumpkin? And now we can see the tip of my needle there. Can you guys see that? Tip of the needle sticking out here. So I'm gonna grab onto that and pull that through. I'm just going to kind of let that lay on top of there for a second as I'm going to switch out my needle to the sharper needle. You guys will not likely have to do this unless you buy that dry packing fiber fill as well, which actually does work very well. It just helps to have a sharper needle. Okay, so we're going to pull on this to give it a little shape. See how it kind of dimples in like that, and we're giving it a little line. Pull in on it a little more than you think you're going to, because when you are going to do the next couple stitches, those kind of bring it in a little tighter too. And then this one tends to feel a little loose. So I always bring it in a little more than I think I want to. And then I'm gonna go ahead and make my next stitch. Okay, so remember here, we went from here. Now we're going to go, we're gonna bring our needle from bottom and go through the top right here. And we're gonna come out the bottom. Always aim for somewhere close to the center where all those stitches come from. Okay. And there's our next little stitch, like that. And now we're going to do another one over here. And then the next, we're going to make another stitch right through this side here. So I'm going to come out. There we go. All right, so far we have 3. 1, 2, 3. I'll show you that from the bottom here. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to do 1 here and 1 here. The other thing too is you really can have as many of these little sections as you feel like doing. You know, there's no rule that pumpkins need to have this amount of lobes. I mean, that's just silly. But the reason that I'm telling you so specifically where to put all these lines and all that is just so that you don't end up with one spot that just seems really lopsided, like it's too big to divide it again, but it's not really, you know, it's too big that where you want to divide it again, but it's not quite big enough, if that makes sense. And here is our very last one. We're going to go down to the middle here. All right. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and weave in my tail, and you might just think, well, can't you just push it through and cut it off? But you can, but I don't think it's gonna stay very well. This is the part where you really need to just kind of weave it back and forth through the fabric. Like I'm really splitting some of these strands of yarn here to make sure that these loops are not gonna come undone. Because it is under a certain amount of tension because your pumpkin is pretty well stuffed and you're using it to create those grooves. You know, you don't want it to just sort of loosen up and undo itself, and then you'll have then you'll have more of like an orange than a pumpkin. Or just a pumpkin without the little lobes, I guess. All right. Once you've woven it back and forth a few times and really kind of gone through, you can feel it going through the fabric and not just the stuffing, and you can cut that off. And then I always do like a little bit of, I'll check it out and see if it looks good. This looks like a little extra lumpy over here. You can do a little bit by pulling, you can kind of move those longer stitches around. You can also use your needle to poke in here and then kind of grab some of that fiber fill. I'm basically like grabbing it and pulling it up. If you feel like there are areas that got flattened out, you can kind of fix that by stabbing in there and kind of moving it around a little bit. This is called the finessing stage of making the pumpkin. Really you don't have to do this at all, but I just wanted to show you that there, if in case you're stitching it up and you're like, oh, that looks wonky there, you don't feel like you don't have any other options, but you can certainly just fix it with your, digging in there a little bit with your needle to kind of move that fiber fill around. And then you just got to weave in your ends. So I'm just weaving in the pumpkin colored end first, and like I said, I like to go in a couple of different directions and just make sure it's really secure. And then we'll weave in these two ends as well. Okay, and I'll finish that part later. But I want to show you how to string these up onto your little jute cord. Let's see, let me just check in and see if I had any more questions. We got some more hellos. Oh, well, hello from Indonesia, cool. And from Central New York. Oh, thanks for being here, Christine. Okay, thanks you guys for your compliments. Okay, so to add all your little pumpkins on there, so what I did is I figured out how long I wanted my garland to be, and then I added another yard onto that because some of the yardage is going to be taken up by a little bit of loops on each end and then some knots between your pumpkins. Definitely is not going to be a whole yard's worth of twine, but it's better to be on the safe side. So then, once I get here, I'll just do like a little simulation of that. So let's just say I wanted my twine, or I wanted my piece to be, you know, maybe about this long, and then I added another yard onto it. So I'm just gonna cut that off, and what I would recommend is once your pumpkins are all done, arrange them in whatever order you think you wanna put them in. That way you can see, like, don't just start putting them on as you go because you might not like how the colors look if you're doing them in a bunch of different colors. This is not to say it has to go in a specific order. You just might want to kind of rearrange where things are. You know, sometimes certain colors jump out at you more, like yellows or whites, and you want to make sure they're kind of evenly dispersed throughout, you know, your garland. So figure out what order they're going to go on in, and then you can just, what I did was I started with the center pumpkin and I put that on first. And if you have an even number of pumpkins, like I do here, just kind of place it slightly off center. So what I did here, we'll find the center of our garland. So that would be right here. So I'm gonna I should have brought I do have a safety pin. I'm gonna put a little safety pin in here now. You can use just a knot, piece of tape, anything to mark that little center of your piece. Also, you don't really need to mark it. You can just slide your pumpkin on and then double check it again later. But I'm gonna mark that so you guys can see this is the center of my twine right here. And let's just say, we're going to do all 5 of these pumpkins on my garland, okay? So if I wanted to put this white one in the center, so this would be my center point, I would put that one on first, and I'm just placing that twine in through my tapestry needle and then just sending it right through the stem. And I like to go not all the way up at the top, but somewhere like through the middle of the stem, like this. Just pull it on through. And then bring it to the center of your garland like this. There's the center. And then I made a knot on each side of my pumpkin because I just knew if these were going to be at kind of an angle or swooping down, I did not want my pumpkins to just have gravity slide them around. I really wanted them to be anchored at certain points. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a little knot right here next to the stem, like that. And this is big enough to not go through my stem. I mean, yeah, maybe if I really yanked on it, I could have it go through, but you could certainly do a second knot right on top of that one to make it a little bit bigger if you want to be absolutely sure it couldn't move. And then I did a knot on the other side of the stem as well. Just like that. And then your little pumpkin is secure in there. And then you can measure, you know, a distance away, whatever, you know, if you measure out on your garland, you can put a pin, like this is where I want my last pumpkin to be, you know, on both ends of it. And then you can figure out how many pumpkins you have and lay that all out, you know, place your pumpkin there on your twine, and then maybe one goes there, and then you can put pins in it and know where you want to put your pumpkins. Or if you just want to make this pumpkin garland, maybe you're making them to sell and it doesn't matter to you how far apart they are. You could just pick like 7 or 8 inches apart. That's where you're going to make your next knot, which you're going to put on there next before you slide your pumpkin on. So you'll put your next pumpkin on around here, whatever that measurement is, if you selected a measurement, and then you can go ahead and thread that through your next pumpkin. So I'm threading that through kind of at the midpoint of the stem. I'm bringing it right up to until it gets to my little knot right there. And then I can go ahead and tie a knot on the other side. Just to keep them from sliding all over the place. And then what I did for hanging, you know, this will just have to do with how you like to hang your garland or whatever you'd like to do. I just tied a little, let's just say I have all my pumpkins on my garland and I'm ready to go, and I figure out how much longer I want it to be or what point I want to have a loop or hanging loop or something. So like if I wanted to have my loop here, I would just fold that and then just make an overhand knot where that is, right here. And then I just tied that nice and tight. And then I actually ended up, because because I'm always worried about things coming undone, I just tied a couple of extra knots here with that little piece. You could certainly add a tiny dab of glue or something to keep your jute from undoing, but I tied maybe like 3 or 4 knots and then I just cut it off like that. And it's just, you know, it's a little rustic knot. That's what it looks like. And I thought it looked very cute. All right, let me just double check and see if I answered everything. Oh, we've got a comment from Catherine. Howdy from Trenton, Texas. Great fall project for sure. Thank you. Also, a bunch of these in various size pumpkins in a rope bowl would be great on a table. I agree, that would be very charming. I love that idea. Thanks for sharing that with us. Okay, you guys, thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I really appreciate you guys being so active in the chat and saying hi and just being like a friendly bunch, how you guys always are. I appreciate it. I just want to let you know right before we wrap up, if you guys are crocheters or you're interested in crocheting, in about half an hour, a little bit less than half an hour, I'm going to be doing another live tutorial, and it's going to be on this little tiny ghost. So if you're interested in making this little ghost, this is a crochet project. You can join me for that in about 25 minutes or so. All right, thanks you guys. Thanks for being here. Bye everyone.